You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast. This is the show where you get the best tips, tricks, and nutritional hacks to help you and your family get healthier. You'll also hear what works and what doesn't work so you don't have to waste your time and money. All right, let's get started.
Hello, I'm Dr. Martin Jr.
And I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctor Is In podcast, and this is episode 141. Today we're going to talk about a couple of interesting studies that came out over the past few weeks. We haven't had a chance to do this for a while. And, really, there has been a few interesting studies that caught our attention this week. So we'll spend this episode just kind of talking through them. These studies are practical, right? Because a lot of times, a lot of research necessarily isn't practical. You can't read them. They don't make any sense. And they just don't have any real practical or clinical, anything you can use on a daily basis from them. So these are studies here that are actually very interesting and are quite practical. So we'll kind of talk about it. The first one that we want to bring to your attention was on probiotics. It was actually a very well-done study. It was a double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial. And basically what they found was that older women on probiotics for 1 year basically resulted in 50% less bone loss compared to women that took a placebo. Again, just another kind of notch in the belt for probiotics.
Yeah. Leaky gut, leaky bones, right?
Well, maybe share with us a few reasons why probiotics would help with bone health.
Well, I think primarily probiotics would help with the absorption, right, of minerals, preventing the loss of mineralization to the bone. When you think of it, like we've done some podcasts on bone health, and we've often talked about bones are more than calcium. You know, people think calcium. And, if you got osteopenia or you got osteoporosis, the doctor wants to give you calcium. But there's so much more that goes into having healthy bones. And we talked about that, like in the diet. But you can have a great diet, but yet have very poor absorption, right?
Yeah, I find that the calcium discussion is just so lazy when it comes to bone health. It's just kind of like, they acted like the bones were just this, single nutrient skeleton, and all you have to do is just feed it calcium and it's going to be happy and you're going to have strong bones and everything's going to go fine. However, we know obviously that's not the case. And what I also didn't like about, or I still don't like really about the discussion of osteoporosis, and we have a lot of people that write to us or come into the clinic that are taking medications for bone health, and rarely are they told to lift weights. Rarely are they told to build their muscle up or consume protein. And there's still this ridiculous idea that protein is hard on your bones when it's completely the opposite. Yeah. But it's kind of one of those things that I don't know how we've gotten to the point in medicine where it's like calcium and bones, that's all it is, right? It's just kind of one of those things. And for a long time, people were taking these drugs that, calcium-based drugs. And then they found out that maybe not the best idea because of the hardening of the blood vessels for cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, and like supplements of calcium, we've said it before, but it's worth repeating. Taking calcium on its own is something we don't like because it rarely gets to the bone where you want it to get. It often sits in the bloodstream, and that's a fact, without having the proper minerals. If you're low in magnesium, for example, and potassium, these are keys, boron and other minerals that if you don't have that, you're not going to get it. And then I was reading a study today, and I'll go sidetrack just for a minute, and I'll come back, I promise. But I was reading a study today about iron, and a lot of women take iron supplements. And a lot of times that iron really does not help to increase they're constantly anemic, right? But they don't realize, again, it's like calcium. There's a lot of other factors, right? And when you're building blood.
And that's interesting.
This is why I tell my patients, listen, when you're building blood, you need a lot of cofactors. You need B12, for example, because without B12 and iron, it will just sit in your blood. Well, then iron becomes very toxic. But when you're taking other cofactors with it, and again, we come back to the gut. Probiotics. Probiotics are because when you have a malabsorption syndrome, and you're not absorbing properly. And these older people, no kidding, they're probably on medications, different things that
it'd be interesting to see how many of them are on like antacids or like beta, all those kind of things that kind of definitely affect.
Well, you know, it's almost interesting because a patient came in last week, and she was 66, I think 67, my age, just about. And she wasn't taking any medication. She said, you know how much flack I get for not taking medication? She said, what do I need medication for? I feel fantastic. And sure enough, when I did all her biomarkers, she was healthy as a horse. But she said, you wouldn't believe the pressure. Well, just take one. Like she said, her doctor, even the pharmacist, you know, she said, I got a friend that's a pharmacist, and they can't believe I'm not taking medication.
Well, especially
they're not
a statin
vitamins
or a beta blocker or something. Just that is a rarity nowadays. But you're right, it is interesting. Now, one thing I want to point out about this study on the probiotics was they were using one of our favorite strands, and that's the thing, right? Mm-hmm. There are thousands and thousands of different types of bacteria, well, millions really, but there are a lot of different types of good bacteria. And it's kind of one of our knocks against yogurt, for example. Now we have a couple knocks against yogurt. A lot of it is very sugary. People don't realize the amount of sugar that they're getting in.
And it's pasteurized?
It's pasteurized. It's sugary, no question. And it's lactobacillus, and there's not a lot of it in there, so a lot of it gets killed by the acid in the stomach. So they're really not getting a ton. Mm-hmm. We tell people don't rely on yogurt for probiotics, right? It's just not, it's not something that, especially if they have a digestive issue to begin with, yogurt's just not one of those things that we would recommend for that. But what's interesting is that yogurt has like one strain, usually like a lactobacillus, and like I said, not a ton of them in there. But this study here was done on one that we like a lot, which is Lactobacillus reuteri.
Reuteri, yeah.
Yeah, which is, it's been studied for a whole bunch of different conditions and very, very effective, which is why we use it in our probiotic formula, because we like it. There's a lot of different things that it does.
Well, it goes after, one thing that reuteri is famous for is it goes after candida, yeast, right? It kills bacteria. So when you want a natural antibiotic out of your probiotic, reuteri is tremendous because of its ability to go after bad bacteria and go after candida. And I love it. I always tell people, look, if you got a yeast infection or you're suspecting leaky gut, you better have reuteri in your
so that's one of the benefits
your
that's been studied
probiotic.
Quite a bit for reuteri, which is candida. But here's a few things, if you're listening, that this specific strain of bacteria has been shown to help with. These are studies that have been shown to help with. First of all, it's a tremendous anti-inflammatory, so very, very good for that. Also seems to help with lowering stress and pain perception, which kind of goes in hand with the anti-inflammatory aspect. Also has been shown to increase the amount of vitamin D absorption.
Yeah.
Obviously,
well, that would bring you right with the vitamin D
yeah,
absorption.
And that's kind of what I was going to get at,
that,
exactly,
right? Yeah,
which is exactly that. And we'll come back around to that in 1 second here. But it's also been obviously shown to help with gut health. You've mentioned candida. Actually, there's studies showing that it's good for the thyroid, improves wound healing. People heal faster. So think of diabetics and stuff, the importance of that. Mm-hmm. Protects against infections. Very, very good, actually, for oral health. Very important. Also, a lot of people don't realize is that L-reuteri plays a key role in vitamin B12 as well.
And the absorption of it.
Yeah, so, I mean, there are a lot of benefits, but this is the one that we wanted to key in on here, is that it actually increases your body's ability to get vitamin D, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Again, when it comes to bone health, everybody thinks calcium, but they really should be thinking vitamin D. Vitamin D and bone health is crucial, and magnesium and potassium and those kind of things. Anyways, that was an interesting study that came out.
It just tells you again that what we at the Martin Clinic have, we did a little bit of an adjustment, right? I don't know how many years ago, where we went from taking a probiotic maybe twice yearly. Certainly if you were taking antibiotics, we always agreed with that. But now the Martin Clinic believes, and every little bit of research that ever comes out confirms exactly our shift. And the shift is take a probiotic every day. Every day, every day. Make it one of your foundational, because, again, here's what we say: leaky gut, leaky brain, leaky gut, leaky joints, leaky gut, leaky skin. I was reading a study even this week, again, just seemed to be confirming that depression is an inflammatory disorder, And at the Martin Clinic, inflammation, what do we say? It doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from leaky gut, or it comes from high circulating insulin, or it comes from free radical damage, right? And we see it all the time. And so here we are. Here's the psychiatric profession saying, you know what? There's a huge link between inflammation in the brain and what's going on in the gut to cause depression. Imagine that. So here we are, right? It's all, you come back to that gut, and getting a broad spectrum probiotic is something that all of our patients should be doing consistently.
Well, and I think
basis.
it's important also, as we just kind of go to the next study here, but I think it's important for people to realize one thing. Just because you're not having any digestive symptoms doesn't mean that you don't have a problem with your digestive system, right? Because people will say, well, I get no digestive symptoms, so my digestive system has to be healthy. But that's not necessarily the case, because for some people, joint pain is a digestive symptom. For some people, skin conditions, psoriasis, eczema, acne is a digestive symptom. Their digestive system is telling them there's a problem, and skin, which is the largest organ, is being affected. So it's kind of one of those things that just because you may not be getting traditional pains or bloating or all these indigestion stuff does not mean that you necessarily have a healthy digestive system. So, and that's important to understand that sometimes it takes a little bit more convincing for somebody who has no digestive system symptoms to take a probiotic, but
and you never get enough good bacteria. Remember, it's always, I try and simplify this. At the end of the day, it's always a battle that goes on in your body, in particular in your gut, between good and bad bacteria. It's just a matter of you having more good than bad. I don't know if you can make it any simpler than that. And having more good than bad calls you win, right? You got a bigger army than your enemy, and your enemy is Candida, bad bacteria. We live in a world where every chemical in the universe wipes out good bacteria. Antibiotics wipe out good bacteria. Stress wipes out good bacteria. A bad diet full of sugar wipes out good bacteria and makes the bad guys grow. So, again, I love probiotics. So, you know what? Get used to us, folks. Let's talk about it.
Okay, let's go on to another study. This is one that came out again recently, and it was interesting because this study found that 2,000 milligrams daily of omega-3 lowered triglycerides and non-HDL in patients with severe hypertriglyceridemia. So they had really high triglycerides. And what they found, because when you have really, really high triglycerides, you're actually at a really high risk for pancreatitis as well. So what they found is that taking 2,000 milligrams a day of omega-3 significantly lowered the triglycerides. So you and I talk a lot about triglycerides as a better indicator of cardiovascular disease than the generic cholesterol. And
it's the boogeyman.
Yeah.
Triglycerides is the boogeyman.
And we've talked also not too long ago how studies have shown that triglycerides actually crosses the blood-brain barrier.
Dangerously.
And it affects your hunger hormones. It can make it really mess you up that way as well. And triglycerides are really bad news when it comes to cardiovascular disease. So this study here found that 2,000 milligrams a day. So it kind of addresses one of the issues that we talk about a lot of times when it comes to omega-3. Because every once in a while, a study will come out and say, oh, we didn't find anything with omega-3. And then when you look at the study, it's like, well, they did like 1,000 milligrams. Plus, when you actually looked at the type of omega-3 they used, if you looked at the EPA and DHA in that 1,000 milligrams, it was like less than 300 milligrams. So really, they weren't getting much at all, right? It was just way too low of a dosage. This one is 2,000 milligrams. So it would actually be interesting to look at what would happen if they actually gave them more than that. Because 2,000 milligrams, in our opinion, is low for a lot of things as well, right? So if somebody was taking a really high-quality DHA or omega-3 fatty acid, this study shows that it would lower their triglycerides. And we've talked in the past about why we love DHA. Now, if you're not sure why we're talking about DHA, DHA is a type of omega-3 fatty acid. The two most popular ones are DHA and EPA. Now, we like DHA because your brain
is made up of DHA.
Yeah, it's mostly made up of fat. Your brain is made up of fat.
Yep.
And DHA is kind of the preferred source of fuel for your brain. So we're big fans of DHA when it comes to, especially for the type of patients that we see in our clinic, and a lot of them are worried about brain health. So we talk a lot about DHA. So DHA, we've talked a lot in the past, studies showing that DHA improves everything from memory to cognition, also decreases the risk of stuff like dementia or age-related dementia. So many different awesome benefits for the brain with DHA. So here's just another thing to add to DHA. We know it's great for anti-inflammatory. And studies have shown this, that if your blood levels of omega-3 are lower than they should be, you're more likely to die from things.
Yeah.
Right? So we're big fans also of DHA. And here's another study showing why you want to take it. And again, the number one issue that we have when it comes to supplementing with omega-3s is most people are taking one that's just not good, just doesn't have enough of anything in it, and two, that they're not taking a proper dosage, right? A lot of people are confused on the dosage.
Yeah, they'll take one, I'm getting 1,000 milligrams. I said, 1,000 milligrams of what, right? Like it's omega-3, and it's good for you. It's never bad. Omega-3 is great. But what you're really looking for in an omega-3 is that, like I said, I like looking at very high levels of DHA, EPA, but DHA in particular. It just sets it apart because it becomes not only brain food, but very, 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 very anti-inflammatory, right?
So let's talk about a third study just to kind of wrap up this episode here. There was one done on B12, and what they did is they compared, and this is a question that we get asked a lot too, right?
Very interesting.
So they compared the effect of a oral B12, so a sublingual B12, and specifically methylcobalamin, which is the form of B12 that we like and that we use in our clinic. And they compared that to the injectable B12s, because a lot of people get B12 shots. And they did this specifically in gastric bypass patients, because remember, in order to get the right amount of B12, you need intrinsic factor in your stomach. So patients that have had a gastric bypass before typically are very, very, very low on B12, which is one of the big reasons why one of the follow-up that people hear when it comes to gastric bypass, so their energy takes a dive, is because they're so low in B12. So this study looked at, okay, let's compare oral B12 to the injectable B12. And you and I have been saying for a long time, and other studies have shown this as well, but this is one that was done in gastric bypass, which made it even more interesting. And what they found in this study is that the oral B12 was equal to the injectable B12, which is awesome because you don't have to get a shot, and a lot of people don't like needles. And it's just something.
Well, it's not convenient either, right?
No, it's not. You have to go to your doctor, and it's one of those things that's not convenient. So this study found that in people that have had a bypass surgery, that B12 had the same effect orally as injectable. So that's great, and this has been done for other scenarios as well, which is why we really like the sublingual B12 when it comes to getting that.
And remember too, B12, and again we talk about this a lot, is so essential. The vast majority of people, well, that I see, so I shouldn't maybe generalize in the population, but they know that they...
The number one complaint of people coming to your office is fatigue and inability to lose weight, right?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, B12.
Yeah, absolutely. But, it elevates your homocysteine levels, which is a marker in the blood that tells you that your B12 probably is low. B12 brings it down. And homocysteine makes you much more susceptible to heart attack, heart disease. And again, so B12 is essential for the production of red blood cells. It brings more oxygen to the brain. It's important even in weight loss. B12 is important for any kind of neurological, any kind of neuralgia, or people that suffer any kind of anything with the nerves. Think about it. And B12 is a stress vitamin, so it's one of the vitamins that is essential in the regulating of cortisol, right? Anyway, like B12 is essential. And I always tell my patients this, and I don't guess, I test. So I always tell people, look, I found that B12 shots, there's nothing wrong with them. But I like to top up B12 every day, and I think I'm right because of the fact that studies are showing that it's every bit as good, but I think it's superior because you're doing it every day. B12 is a water-soluble vitamin.
Well, one of the things that subjectively that people would say when they were getting the B12 shots is that they felt good for, maybe the first 10 days, and then their energy toppered off, and then it kind of slowly decreased. Then they got a shot, and they felt better, and it kind of went like a yo-yo up and down. Whereas once you can get your blood levels up with a sublingual and you take it every day, it's just like you have that steady level, which is, one of the reasons why we really like sublingual B12. And again, it's important to point out that they studied methylcobalamin, which most people don't use methylcobalamin. They use the cyanide version of B12. So we make sure that it's a methylcobalamin. Now, this brings up an interesting question. We just recently did a live presentation online. We did a webinar. We had a whole bunch of people on there. And then one of the things that we like to do after is we stick around, usually for about 45 minutes to an hour after, and just answer a ton of questions. And, we always get a lot of questions, a lot of good questions, and, we enjoy doing that. Now, one of the questions that we got this week, and I'm going to write a newsletter about it coming up, but this would be a good opportunity because it's about B12. And we've heard this from a few different people as well. And this is what the question was. It's like, hey, I'm eating red meat and my B12 levels are still low. Why is that? And we kind of answered that on the webinar, but let's just kind of answer that question now. And we kind of broke it down to really two primary reasons in a sense, right? One, it's something that there's a saying that basically is you are what you eat.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a part truth because you really are what you absorb.
Yeah.
And you could be eating enough B12, but if you have any digestive issue whatsoever, any kind of issue with you can imagine you're not going to get the B12 at all, right? So underlying digestive issue can definitely make that.
Any medication.
And that's the second one was medications. A lot of medications. Just why don't you list a few? Because
like metformin is classic, and that's the diabetic medication, right, of choice. Almost every diabetic is on metformin, or at least they start off on metformin. They even start off on metformin if you have PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, because they know it's effective in lowering insulin. But at the end of the day, if you're taking, this is my, I love the fact that we have a clinic because I don't have to rely on research. Research gives me clues, it gives me indications, but patients give you reality. And you know what? I just find that almost every medication, from high blood pressure to diuretics to, certainly antacids, we know that. I mean, that just makes sense. But any kind of medication, it seems to me, knocks the B12 out of your body. So you're better off at that stage to take B12 as a supplement because, you know what, it's water soluble. So, it's not like you're going to croak because you're taking too much B12. You're better off to have high levels of B12 than have low levels of B12.
And that number, and we talked about this also on the webinar, when you go get your blood tested and they give you a number of what your B12 is at, that number, we hate that. Because somebody at that number can feel completely different than another person at that number. It all has to do with whether or not your cells can actually do something with it. And some people, cells are so resistant or they're not sensitive enough that they need a lot more B12 in their blood to get the same effect. So that's why the number one question really when it comes to any kind of healthcare is how do you feel, right? I feel better when my B12 levels are higher. Okay, that's good. That doesn't. So a lot of times they get fixated on a number or a doctor gets fixated on a number and it's like they don't even ask the patient, well, how do you feel? Now, going back to that red meat question, not getting enough B12, there's a third aspect. So one would be not absorbing it or a digestive issue, right? They got a digestive issue. Two is medication. And the third one really, I guess, would be they need digestive enzymes. Sometimes that can be enough to fix the problem as well, right? Yeah. Just as we age, one of the theories of aging is we lose digestive enzymes and the ability to absorb stuff. And so that happens as we age. So when it comes to B12, no matter what, you're a massive fan of it. I hear you talking about B12 quite a bit. And a lot of people that come into our clinic are very low because they got bad energy. They got no energy. And B12 kind of fits into that equation there. So I'll kind of just mention this last study real quick in passing because we're out of time. But I've said this before, you and I, whenever I come across a coffee study, it gets my attention. Right?
Check. Put a check mark beside it.
And if it's a bad coffee study,
we discard it.
I just discard it. I don't even listen to it. But in reality, there are a lot more positive No question now they're starting to find out that coffee is actually very good for you. Decreases all-cause mortality, and it's great for even your diabetes and stuff like that, right?
Anti-cancer?
Anti-cancer. Well, another one came out that they found that the caffeine concentrations equivalent to 4 cups of coffee, which is generally what we people always ask us, how much coffee can you drink or do you drink? And research shows around that 4 cups of coffee is awesome for you, right? It doesn't mean that more is bad for you or less isn't good for you. It's just that a lot of studies are right around that 4 cups of coffee. And this one, same thing. So around that 4 cup of coffee mark, they found, and this is interesting, it actually improved the mitochondria function of cardiovascular cells. Yoo-hoo! So it's good for they're finding that it's very, very good for your cardiovascular system, specifically at the mitochondria level, which, again, is the battery pack of your cells. It's where you're healthy. Yeah. If your mitochondria aren't healthy, you're not healthy. And
you're exhausted.
You're exhausted. You and I look at cancer as a disease of the mitochondria. It's a metabolic disorder. Yeah. So there's a lot to be said about the health of your mitochondria, and the coffee seems to help that. So, again, here's another positive win for coffee. So if you haven't had a cup of coffee yet, or if you're listening to this over a cup of coffee, enjoy that coffee. And now I'm thinking about a cup of coffee.
Yeah, so am I. And, I always tell my patients, I say, look, if somebody asks me to give up coffee, sorry, I'm not doing it.
Yeah, if a diet required me to give up a cup of coffee, that'd be very, very difficult.
Yeah. See, that's what's nice. Even when, with our diet and we talk about intermittent fasting, I like it because I can have my coffee in the morning.
Coffee's no problem. They even heavy cream in a coffee if you're low carb is awesome. And fasting, a cup of coffee can get you through a fast if you're fasting.
Because it helps regulate your blood sugar, you see.
Yeah, and it's very good for you. So anyways, I just thought I'd share that study that I came across that was actually recently published again, showing that actually this was published on the first day of summer this year, 2018. So cup of coffee, about 4 cups, very good for you. So again, we want to thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions at all, you can email us at info@martinclinic.com. Every Thursday morning, you do a Facebook Live where a lot of people jump on there, ask you a ton of questions. So that's another great way to interact with us. Also, if you're not a newsletter subscriber, go to our website, martinclinic.com, and sign up for our newsletters. And let me just say one more thing. We have a new homepage coming out in the next little bit we're really excited about. It's going to have a ton of training videos on a lot of topics that people ask us about. So it's going to be a very good place to go and learn about things like fatigue and how to fix your fatigue, how to fix your hormones, how to protect your brain. So we're very excited about that. It's coming out in the next little bit. So again, thank you for listening and have a great day.